The BBC's Freefall, a propaganda machine unmasked. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to peel back the curtain on the BBC, an institution that has long prided itself on being the bastion of unbiased reporting. Yet, with recent events, it seems the BBC is spiralling out of control, and the facade is crumbling. The question on everyone's lips: is the BBC a propaganda machine masquerading as a news outlet? For decades, the BBC has managed to stay above the fray, but now, as people wake up to the depths of its failings, we find ourselves in an era where the British public is demanding accountability. The recent Hugh Edwards scandal was just the tip of the iceberg. The real issue at hand is the ongoing bias and misinformation that seems to permeate the BBC's reporting, particularly in the complex and volatile context of the Middle East. A question of integrity. Let's delve into some recent examples. The BBC has faced backlash for its coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict, where allegations of bias have reached a fever pitch. How can an organisation claim to report on sensitive issues like this while broadcasting a 40-minute live stream of Ayatollah Khamenei's propaganda speech? With his quotes emblazoned across the screen, proclaiming October 7th as a logical and legal missile attack on Israel, it begs the question: are we watching news or state-sponsored propaganda? This act alone raises alarms. It's one thing to report on world events, but it's another to amplify narratives that serve a particular agenda. The BBC, funded by the British public, has a duty to present information objectively. Instead, what we're witnessing is an alarming trend of broadcasting statements that align more closely with propaganda than with factual reporting. The BBC Verify debacle. Then there's the shambles that is BBC Verify. An award-winning journalist, David Kerr, recently highlighted the blatant pro-Iranian bias in their reporting. A video titled "Where Iran's Missiles Struck in Israel" was presented as an exposé, but quickly revealed itself to be a tool for misinformation. It claimed to verify strikes on military targets, but conveniently omitted crucial details about civilian casualties, such as a verified strike on a shopping mall. This deliberate exclusion of information is nothing short of troubling. By presenting a skewed narrative that downplays civilian casualties, BBC Verify risks becoming a mouthpiece for Iranian propaganda, rather than an impartial news outlet. How can the public trust an organisation that selectively reports facts to shape a desired narrative? The consequences of misinformation. The stakes are high. The BBC's spiralling reputation comes at a time when trust in media is already fragile. When misinformation goes unchecked, the consequences can be dire. It breeds division, fuels anger, and erodes the fabric of democratic discourse. The British public deserves better than a media landscape riddled with bias and half-truths. But wait, it gets worse. The BBC has a history of hiring journalists with questionable ties. Take, for example, Nal Al-Marfi, who has previously worked with outlets known for their partisan reporting. Her past associations raise serious questions about the impartiality of the information being disseminated. How can viewers be assured that they are receiving accurate information when the journalists delivering it have affiliations that suggest otherwise? A call for accountability. It's time for the British public to ask hard questions. Who is truly watching the BBC, and why do they continue to trust it? The anger and frustration are palpable. With protests and calls for accountability rising, the BBC must confront its failings head-on. In a world where information is power, the media must strive for integrity. It's not enough to merely report. The responsibility lies in how those reports are framed and the implications they carry. The BBC must recalibrate its approach to ensure it serves the public interest and not a hidden agenda. Shifting gears. The role of the US and Yemen. While the BBC wrestles with its credibility, let's shift our attention to another hotbed of conflict: Yemen. the US has conducted airstrikes on Houthi-controlled areas, asserting a commitment to protect freedom of navigation in international waters. As the Houthis ramp up their attacks on vessels, the situation grows increasingly precarious. But what about the coverage of this conflict? Does the BBC's reporting reflect the complexities on the ground, or is it merely a reflection of geopolitical biases? The silence on the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is deafening. As the BBC focuses on sensational headlines, the real story, the suffering of innocent civilians caught in the crossfire, remains largely unreported. The royal connection, a distraction from the chaos. And while we're inundated with issues of war and propaganda, Princess Kate has made headlines with a seemingly innocuous post celebrating her friend's sailing achievements. Is this a genuine moment of joy or a calculated distraction from the chaos that surrounds us? As she re-enters public life, one can't help but wonder if royal engagements serve a purpose beyond mere entertainment. Are these distractions meant to keep the public's gaze away from the pressing issues at hand? This raises an intriguing question. Is the royal family being used as a smokescreen to divert attention from the failures of the media and the government? While citizens grapple with increasing living costs, potential recession, and geopolitical tensions, the monarchy's presence seems to serve as a convenient distraction, keeping the populace entertained while the world crumbles around them. The snowball effect of diminished trust. The consequences of diminishing trust in institutions like the BBC and the royal family can't be understated. When people lose faith in the very sources meant to inform them, they turn to alternative channels. This shift can lead to the rise of misinformation and conspiracy theories, as individuals seek answers in corners of the internet that often lack credibility. Moreover, the public's frustration can manifest in dangerous ways. As protests erupt and calls for accountability grow louder, there's a palpable sense of unrest. Will we see a movement rise that demands not just accountability from the BBC, but also a re-evaluation of the entire media landscape in the UK? The lines are drawn, and the battle for truth has begun. Final thoughts. The time for change is now. As we dissect the BBC's failures and the wider implications of their reporting, one thing becomes clear. The British public deserves transparency and accountability from its media institutions. The trust has been shattered, and the time for change is now. We need to foster a media landscape that prioritizes truth over propaganda. It's a tough battle, but one worth fighting. If we don't hold these institutions accountable, we risk spiraling further into a world where misinformation reigns supreme. It's up to the public to reclaim their power, to demand better from the BBC and all media outlets. As we navigate this murky terrain, let's remember, journalism is not just a profession, it's a vital part of democracy. It's time to push back against the tide of misinformation and demand a media landscape that serves the public interest above all else. Thank you for joining this discussion. We invite you to engage in the comments below and share your thoughts on this critical issue. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more insights as we continue to navigate the murky waters of today's political and media landscape. Together, let's demand better. Take care and stay informed.